Let's get into a story on kind of like delusion. This is our story, not more on, yeah. People believe what they see, but only according to what they want to see or what they've been told. Or second-laws and being a religious man, I was going to church one day, and someone who I won't name, she'll kill me, was visiting from out of town and going to the same church. Now, as far as she was concerned, I didn't go to church anymore because I'd actually left the church maybe 5 years earlier, but I'd started going back. And very cheekily, I prayed to God and said, "Can we trick her?" Now, you'd assume God wouldn't trick somebody or have that kind of sense of humour. So anyway, she was staying here, she left, and she was walking to church. It's quite a distance to the church, halfway across town. But it was a beautiful Sunday morning, she was happy to do it. I waited till she'd gone, put on a suit, jumped on my push bike, because I didn't have a car, and I cycled to the church a different way. When I got to the church, I put my bike around the side of the building, went to the church front door and stood there and waited for her. When she got to the church, she was at the road and the church is quite a way in, and she saw me at the door and she just stared, and then she sort of looked at me and she waved. She got closer along the longest driveway and she waved again, and I stood there and I thought, I wonder if she knows it's me. And she got right up close to me, and like the width of the house, and she stared at me, and she sort of cocked her head a bit and looked really confused, and she said, "Oh, hi, how are you?" Like I was a stranger. And I looked at it and thought, she doesn't know it's me, even though she's looking right at me and she can see it's me. She only saw me like half an hour earlier. Then when she got right up to the door and she said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Didn't you recognise me from the road?" And she said, "No." And then she said, "I was only when I was just there that I thought you looked a lot like, who you are." And I just cracked up laughing. And so her mind from the road saw it was me. But because her mind had told her she can't see me, that I'm back at my place, not in a suit, with my children, therefore it can't be me. Okay, well, this woman was one of my daughters. And so she knew it was Dad. No, she didn't know it was Dad. She knew Dad was back at home with her sisters and brother. So she stared, and the first time from the road, she completely didn't recognise me. She looked up probably 3 times. The second time she looked up, she still didn't recognise me, because her mind said, "That man is not Dad, Dad's at home." But when she got up really close, she looked at me and looked confused, and then her mind said to her, "That guy looks a lot like your father, but that's not him, he's back at home." It wasn't until she was standing at the door she goes, "Dad, it's you!" That's how our mind can control what we see and what we think we see. And it's like that Franz Fanon quote where we won't believe in what we're uncomfortable with. Like with my mother, people would come up and say to me, "Your mother's just a swear word," and I'd say, "No, it's my mother." I would convince myself that she had the status of motherhood in my life, therefore she has her faults, she has her issues, but she's not a bad person because she's my mother. That's it. So all the bad things my mother did, I would just hide. I would just pretend they didn't exist. And it wasn't until I was in my 30s that I finally broke off all contact with my mother, because her narcissism and the way she tricked and cheated people and the things she did, it was just finally too much for me. And I had to sit down and actually face the truth for what the truth really was. And my mother's brothers and sisters all think she's an angel. And there's a page on Facebook with Mum. She's dead now. And my sisters honour Mum, even though Mum ruined their lives. They can't figure out in their deluded minds that Mum, because Mum played the victim, the wife beaten victim. So when Mum was having affairs on Dad, my sisters saw it as she was getting back at Dad for Dad having affairs on her, or she was a victim just trying to make better in a bad life. And when Mum left Dad and still carried on being a bad person, it was just Mum struggling through life. No one actually sat down and said, Mum's a narcissist. Narcissist is a very nasty person. And one of my sisters actually said that to me, well, not long before Mum passed away. And but at Mum's funeral, and even now, she still honours her on Mother's Day. We're not to hate people, but we really need to see them for what they are and for who they are, really, so that they can't control us anymore. As long as a mother or a father or parents can have us stuck in that rut where we believe they're our parent, therefore they're great, they have control over us. They will use that in some way to control us and to get the better of us and rule over us and use and abuse and manipulate us to do their bidding. And we have no idea it's happening. I've been in many relationships with friends and stuff like that, and I've said, look, I visited the house, and mostly the mother's really nasty. Men could be drunks and violent and stuff, but the real mind manipulative ones I've found in my life anyway was women. And because it doesn't take violence to control a person. You can just control them by tricking them. And I'd say, your mother's not very nice. And they go, oh no, Mum's great. And I'd say, but do you realise what she just did? And I'd explain to them what their mother did to trick them. And I was doing this at like 16 with my friends, and they'd go, no, you got it wrong. You're reading my mother wrong. My mother's not like that. And I'd be, oh, okay. And yet at the same time, I was explaining to them that their mothers were manipulating them. My mother was manipulating me, and I couldn't see my mother manipulating me. That's how we get. And it's not until we wake up that we finally realise that we've been fooled. I know one girl whose mother and father manipulate her, her sisters manipulate her, and 2 or 3 family friends manipulate her, and she gets sucked in with a whole lot of them. And when it's group manipulation, it's a lot harder to see it, because it seems like everyone around you saying everything's great. And if there's a main manipulator, like the mother in this case, if all the others around back up and constantly tell the victim that the mother's an angel, the victim will always believe the mother's an angel. In my house, my sisters were always doing that, but you get group manipulation or group trickery where, like the case where all my sisters had the keys to my batch, and they were, Mum got a copy made of the key and then gave that to all my sisters. You know, I had 6 sisters, but there was about 4 of them, I think, that were old enough to use it, 5 of them, and they were going into my room, stealing money, sleeping there when they were drunk while I was at work, stealing stuff out of my room, like I'd buy something for myself, bring it back, and then the next day I'd find it was gone, or 2 weeks later it'd be gone. I'd be like, what are they doing? Like a little radio or something. And I'd be trying to figure out what happened to it. And I'd think, oh, James, you've gone and lost it somewhere. And I was so unconfident, I was always blaming myself, but the whole family was ganging up against me. And I just had no idea I was being tracked by the closest people to me in my life. They were all ganging up on me, and if I had said anything bad about Mum, they would have said, "Oh heck, Mum never did that," or it would have occurred to me or someone else that my mother had done it. And one of the reasons why my ex-girlfriends didn't get on with my mother was because they'd say, "Your mother's not very nice," and Mum would click onto it and realise her position of being the narcissist, the controller, was being threatened. So she'd attack the girlfriends. And my ex-wife, my mother and her got on so well, my mother taught my ex-wife how to manipulate me. So you get this kind of, but all through it I was deluded with everybody. I always thought everyone was innocent. It's one of the reasons why I like being single now and living by myself, because there's no one left in my life to trick me. People out of my life can trick me, like work and any groups I can become part of, but not in my personal space, and therefore it's not emotionally draining. It doesn't emotionally hurt me. And I'd love to have a wife who was honest and truthful and who wasn't out to get something out of me all the time. You just get so tired of people tricking you. You get so tired of them trying to take advantage of you, to take this from you and take that from you, and you just never know where you stand with them. And you finally get to the stage enough you think, "No, look, I'm over all that. I like this." If I want to go out and buy one of the problems I had with my ex-wife is she was always making me feel guilty for buying anything for myself. And if I didn't get quality tools and then something broke down, because she'd go, "Oh, so you got to buy that, and your children are going with that." And she was always on about how her children were going to go with that, family was going to go with that. If I brought something expensive for the garage or for the car or for the house, so I wouldn't buy it. And because my mother was always making me feel guilty about men always buying for themselves, And then when I couldn't fix something because I didn't have the quality gear to fix it, my ex would turn around and say, "Oh, you're such a loser. You know, you can't even fix this." So you can't win with manipulators. They always find a way to blame you, to make you feel small, inadequate, not good enough, and you're just never at rest in your own home. Your heart is never at peace. And so I'd rather not be deluded, like with my daughter at the church, where you're standing right in front of them, they can't even tell it's you. Your eyes in there telling them the whole form in front of them is you, but their mind is saying, "No, that's not them, they're back at home." And it's like this COVID injection. COVID's found that I was late in 2019, it's now 2021, and they've got a vaccine for it that is not time tested, and they're telling you it's the cure of all cures, and it's like, 3 years time it will be time tested by all the guinea pigs taking it today. So it's scary. People are just too easily convinced to do something without thinking about it. It's like young girls. I used to see it all the time. My sisters, a really young, sweet, gorgeous thing would turn up, and I'd go, "Oh my gosh, she's so cute." I was always falling in love with cute girls, and I'd think, "Oh my gosh, she's gorgeous," and she'd be like 16, and I'd be like 17, and then she'd fall in love with a guy, and I'd be, oh, I'd be so happy for her. She's fallen in love with this guy. And then they'd find ways to talk her out of being in love with that guy, going to a party with him. She'd end up get drunk, and have random sex with some loser, and then losing all the hopes and dreams of being married to a guy and having sex with the one she loves for the rest of her life. And then by the end of the party, she probably had sex with 4 or 5 guys. And the next day she'd be like, oh my gosh, look what I've become. And from then on she ends up like that. People kill people's dreams. And I've seen older women talk young girls out of being in love with a guy that they're madly in love with. And they sit there and they just keep saying bad things about him. And it just clicks in the girl's head, and she starts thinking, yeah, and they'll present them with someone who's not a nice guy, but he's a real sleaze. And he's only going to use her, abuse her and all that. But the young girl's not mentally equipped to deal with that. So she follows the older woman's advice, goes with that guy and gets used and abused and ends up hating men, becoming a feminist, I think with feminists they believe that the sooner the young woman is hurt by a guy and they'll deliberately set her up with a bad guy, the sooner she can become like that and be a strong, forceful woman in the world. But in the same sense, losing her gentle motherhood, loving nature and sweetness and all that family she ends up with would have needed. So, and her children can't get that from her if she's lost it herself. That's something to think about. Anyway, so I just want to say that, all that stuff. And delusion is, like what Franz Fanon says, is when people are uncomfortable with what they see right before them, it doesn't matter what you can tell them, what evidence you can give them, as long as you're uncomfortable with the evidence, and especially in their own guilt, and admitting they're guilty, you should realise that if you finally realise you're guilty of something, that's wisdom. You've come to this area where you've discovered you made a mistake, and you're wise enough to admit it, even to other people. So, people when they're uncomfortable with an idea, they won't accept the idea, even though it's a good example, just a sort of fantasy, is UFOs. A UFO could land in, say, New Zealand. 1,000 people could see it, and then it could take off, and the rest of the world wouldn't believe it. There's actually been 4 or 5 events in history in the last 50 years where multitudes of people have seen what they believe is a UFO, but the rest of the world won't believe it. But all the people, I've seen interviews and documentaries, and all the people who, my mother was really into this, who would be sitting there being interviewed, would all swear they saw this UFO, came right out close, hovered above them and all that sort of stuff. And, but the rest of the world doesn't believe it. So it's interesting. I see no reason why there isn't other life on other planets. It completely confused me why we would think we're the only ones in an infinite reality. It's human pride and arrogance. Just enough thought into it. God bless you. Have a good day, and enjoy yourself. And question everything. Question what you think. Have the courage to face what's real, accept it, and change and rearrange your life happily, even though it's uncomfortable. Make the adjustments, because adjustments need to be made. And if you need courage and strength, be with those that have the courage and strength to accept you for who you are, what you've done, and who you want to be, and they won't limit you and hinder your personal growth in being you as you naturally are. Take care.